You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real as Roland Martin Unfiltered. By going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com, you can make this possible. Hey folks, welcome to today's special edition of Roland Martin Unfiltered. We are off, it's the holidays, but we still have something special for you. When the Nigerian girls were kidnapped, when hundreds of them were kidnapped, it caught the nation's attention, but then of course it slightly faded away. Actually the world's attention, but then it eventually faded away. Yet Aisha Sase, longtime CNN anchor, now a freelance journalist, has focused on this in her new book. It is called, boom, you get it right there, Beneath the Tamarind Tree. Of course, it is a phenomenal book that lays out the behind the scenes about that particular story. And so we recently sat down with her for a great conversation, one that I think you will enjoy. Here's my discussion with Aisha Sase. Hey folks, joining me right now, Aisha Sase. She is the author of the book Beneath the Tamarind Tree, a story of courage, family, and the law school girls of Boko Haram. What up?
What up?
All chilling. What you up to?
Oh, you know, writing a book, you know, popping in to see you, dealing with you and your ways.
Okay, whatever. First of all, you need to understand, I had to deal with Aisha when we were both at CNN. She was CNN International. Of course, I was on CNN. And it wasn't much flavor on CNN International.
Oh, you're not going to play that card.
It wasn't much flavor.
No, you're not
and so whenever I was on, she knew, first of all, ratings spiked.
First of all,
and she
we didn't
knew,
have ratings.
and she
that
knew.
was one of the issues.
No, you did have ratings. And then she also knew that that when I came on, other folks were like, that's right.
You brought the funk.
That's right.
You brought the funk.
That's how we do it.
And then I had to be like, rap.
No, you didn't.
It's a rap.
You were like, another segment, another segment, another segment.
How long has it been? 10 years? I known you that long?
2007, so it'll be 12 years. I joined CNN in 2000.
You're looking every...
I joined in 2007.
Wow. You know, the years have been kind.
What you just said?
I was going to say the years have been kind to you. And it's good.
Don't get cut. Don't get cut. 'Cause I can cut this interview. See? Uh-huh.
Are you really going to power trip? Let's talk about my book.
I can do that.
Oh, God.
What does that say? Matter of fact, just read the shirt. See, I wore the shirt today. This is the first time I've worn the shirt, just to remind you. But first of all, I rolled this way when I was on your show.
You did. You came into my house, so to speak, and you rolled this way.
And did the damn thing.
It's true. It's true.
Where are you now? You in Atlanta? Are you in L.A.? Are you living somewhere else? Are you in London?
I am in L.A. I am in L.A.
What the hell are you doing in L.A.? What are you doing?
So I finished the book. My plan is to turn this into a film. a film or limited TV series, because I believe the world needs to have as many access points to the story as possible. Plus, you know, it's made for a dramatic telling on screen. Also, I might be joining you in this kind of digital space soon.
Really?
Really, I might be. And also working on a scripted series.
Cool.
So yeah,
Sound like a little busy.
You know, and I also have a charity. I have a charity, an NGO working in West Africa and Sierra Leone, where I'm originally from, with hundreds of girls, almost 600 girls, leadership development.
Born there?
Born in London.
Born in London.
But spent my formative years in Sierra Leone.
That's where your people from.
That's where my people are from.
Right, that's how we normally say, not where you're from. Where your people from?
My people are from Sierra Leone, West Africa, and, you know, again, part of why I want to write the story is because my people are from a part of the world that's incredibly poor, incredibly neglected, and it was education that led to me sitting talking to you.
When we talk about what happened with, I remember this story vividly because, like most stories that come out of the continent of Africa, it's not like other media, especially Western media, really gives a damn. You will have coverage from the BBC and others, but frankly, the United States, I mean, it has to rise to a certain level for it to finally get some attention in the United States. And it did after a long period of time.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, this story was a complicated one because where it happened was so remote in Nigeria, corner of northeastern Nigeria, and to be honest, even the Nigerian government really did its best. You know, the government at the time, the president was Goodluck Jonathan, to kind of keep it tamped down. So there was effectively an information blackout. So it took a minute. It took a couple of weeks before it really kind of broke through that nothing was as it seemed. And then, of course, even though Nigerians were leading the rally on the ground to ask for more information, it's when celebrities in the West picked it up that it became an international.
But you also have members of Congress, folks like Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, Frederica Wilson, and others who continue to speak to the issue.
Absolutely, and they've got to, because there are 112 girls missing. So this story
112
isn't over.
still missing.
Still missing.
But what was the total number of girls that they kidnapped?
So the night itself, when they gathered them all up and put them in vehicles and made them walk into the forest, they took 276 girls.
Gotcha.
219 disappeared because 57 of that number escaped in the hours afterwards. But it was really 219 that disappeared for years, basically. And of that 219, only 107 are back. So over 100 girls are still missing. And my thing is, Roland.
And how long has it been?
5+ years.
Wow.
April 14th, 2014 is when it happened. And the thing is, you know, and I say this, and this is not to take away from the pain of any family that's lost a child, but, you know, there's still a spotlight on JonBenet Ramsey, that little girl who was found murdered, you know, 2 decades ago. There's still a spotlight on Natalie Holloway, the girl who got, you know, who went missing in Aruba, and Madeleine McCann, the little toddler. When it's...
operative here, white women, white girls.
Listen, and when you see it happen over and over again, and listen, I don't begrudge the attention their families got, not at all. It's horrific to lose your child. But these children matter as well. And the fact that it's been 5+ years and nobody even brings it up, there's almost a kind of, oh, it's Africa, bad things happen in Africa all the time, so.
Yeah, but also, but it's not even just Africa, because the reality is, if you're a black woman in the United States, I mean, the only way it rises to that level, it has to take protest. It's weeks later when we all know the immediate,
Can we talk about R. Kelly?
The first 48, 72 hours
Can we talk
are the most. But not even R. Kelly. I'm just talking about.
Yeah, but R. Kelly's perhaps the closest to this in the sense that this was something that happened, and years upon years upon years, everybody knew.
No. I'm talking about right now. I'm talking about. I've had the Black and Missing Foundation folks on.
Absolutely.
And black women, when they come up missing, and I call folks out. When I was at the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, my second job in the industry, when I was at CNN, I'm like, because here's the reality. When a white girl comes up missing or is murdered, our industry are made up of largely white men. And if the executives are not white men, they're white women. And so when it happens, they see their daughters, their nieces, their cousins, their aunts, their sisters.
Yeah, absolutely. Real
when
talk,
it's us, I don't know them.
Well, I mean, this comes back again to representation, why we have to be at the table. This is why we have to be at the table. We have to be in these organizations. We have to be across the board.
In leadership positions.
In leadership positions. Because until that happens, until we are in control of telling our own stories, which is why I'm writing this book, then you get a story which affects, you know, or at the heart of it is a person of color, and it only rises to attention for a minute.
Did you have issues trying to keep the spotlight on these girls when you were at CNN International?
You know, I think that the interest when it sparked, CNN led the way. We led the way. We dragged the world's attention to this. You know, I'm proud of the work I did with my colleagues. We won a Peabody for it. CNN was committed to the story. I think where I became disheartened was when the 21 came out, and I write about this in the book. When the 21 came out, it was October 13th, 2016. We were now
2 years after.
2 years after, just almost 2.5 years after. We're creeping up to the presidential election between, you know, Hillary and Trump, and there was just barely any interest. I got on the plane. They did let me go, but I remember thinking when I'd met them, I was the first journalist to get even remotely close to them, and there just wasn't any interest in exploring it. It was just minimal interest, and you kind of just realize that it just, you know, when it was the tragedy, when it was, as you say, the level of when it was something so awful, the girls were missing and we could talk about their abduction, there was an interest. But when there was almost like a good news story almost, it's almost like they didn't feel it.
Okay, which dovetails with this whole notion that, yes, when it's misery,
exactly,
when it's pain, when it's
exactly,
agony, oh, but the spotlight.
Yes.
But frankly,
yes.
some folks would say here, when it's positive news, then it's not interesting.
Yeah.
So in essence, what media loves, what mainstream media loves, they love black pathology.
They're more readily drawn to it. They're more readily drawn to the theater of it. And that was more ready to get eyeballs and to have people committed to it. I mean, you know, I talked about this, and you know, the one thing I'll say about CNN, you know, I criticized the Ebola coverage, you know, that came out of Western organizations, you know, at its height in you know, 2013, 2014, 2015, because there was no interest in that story, despite the fact that thousands were dying across the continent until those 2 American medics were affected in Liberia. And then when they showed Africans, it was at our worst, at our most just unable to contain whatever was in our bodies, whether we were half clothed, whether we had been stripped of our dignity, and those pictures were put on the air. And that, you know, and I said openly, and you know what? CNN said, it came out over social media that I'd, you know, criticized the coverage, and they put me on the air to say it, and to say, like, you know, we should care about the humanity of the people on that continent. I'm still working on that. That's what this book is about, trying to humanize these girls.
But you also deal with the reality of a Nigerian government that was porous in its response and its unwillingness to accept outside help.
Yeah, and that's the truth. I mean, listen, the government at the time of Good Luck Jonathan, you know, didn't say anything publicly on this for almost 3 weeks. The president didn't speak out. The day after the girls went missing, he was at a rally dancing and like doing a political campaign for somebody. You know, the government has taken issue with the fact that I have said that they don't care, or the last regime didn't care, and this government, this current regime, hasn't done a whole lot better in its treatment of the families of the missing girls, the 112, because they're poor. I've said that over and over again because I know how Nigeria operates, and other Nigerians that I've spoken to, many, many Nigerians say, if these girls had had famous last names, the entire machinery of the state would have been activated to do something.
But in essence, they were poor.
They were not just poor, they were poor from a Muslim part of the country. So the Christian president at the time, because Nigeria is riven by that Muslim-Christian tension, basically his people around him, and even his wife, who came out and said there were no girls taken, basically was like, this is a hoax. I mean, you know, Vladimir Duterte, who you may remember, was a correspondent at CNN at the time on this story in Nigeria. And we were on the podcast for CBS a couple of days ago, and he said the first time he heard the term fake news wasn't in the US, was on this story, because the Nigerian government said, this is a fake story. people he was dealing with in the authorities said this isn't true. And there's still that strain of denial. I have met parents who've sat and wept and showed me pictures of their children. I have met children who've escaped. I tell their stories, and people still say, some people in Nigeria say, this never happened.
You also had to deal with this reality, which is also why people were saying, why did the United States intervene? Boko Haram, terrorist organization.
Yeah.
So here we are. We would at that time you were dealing with Al Qaeda.
Yeah.
You're talking about ISIS. You're talking about Boko Haram, and folks here were saying, wait a minute, U.S. If you supposedly have this international war on terror,
and this is...
here you go.
Here you go. And I say, and I write in the book that, you know, the fact that these men were able to storm this school and take all of these girls is a flare to illuminate a problem of security and stability in the region. If you're able to pull something like this off, it tells you that there's something very, very wrong and that there's a vacuum of leadership. In vacuums, in spaces like this, where you're dealing with terrorist elements in and around, they tend to take root. We saw that in Afghanistan, where there was a vacuum and Osama bin Laden slipped in. We saw that in Yemen, where Anwar al-Awlaki slipped in and then managed to get that Nigerian school kid to make his way to Yemen, where he trained him and he tried to bring down a plane over Detroit. The US and people today should still pay attention to this story, because northeastern Nigeria isn't getting any more stable. Not only that, Boko Haram splintered in 2016 and a faction aligned itself directly with ISIS. So now you have this African group aligned with ISIS. You have ISIS on the run from Iraq and Syria. They don't have a place to be. Where are they going to go? The chances are, unfortunately, they may take root or deeper root in places in West Africa. And what might happen if they take root in those places? If they plot, who might they plot against? We should all pay attention to this.
The other thing that I think is also important for folks to understand, the significance of Nigerian oil to the U.S.
Nigeria is a major oil supplier. Not only that, it's a major trading partner worth billions between the U.S. and to the U.S. The U.S. is one of the largest exporters to Nigeria, sub-Saharan Africa. Not only that, Nigeria is the critical partner for the U.S. in its war against terror. So this didn't just happen to some, in some faraway land that we can roll our eyes and shrug and go back to sleep. We should pay attention. And, I say in the book, pay attention. If you don't want to pay attention because you think these girls' lives matter, pay attention for national security reasons.
And I think, again, that's where this sort of ambivalence was, people were saying, is because the U.S. was going, because of our relationship, we really don't want to really intervene in those
And the
affairs.
Nigerians didn't want them intervening as well.
Right,
Let's
but the flip side, though, is that had the United States been far more aggressive in making it clear, y'all need to deal with this, that level of pressure plays an important part when you're dealing with somebody who's a major trading and oil partner.
Yeah, and also, again, the Nigerian government, whether it's Human Rights Watch or Amnesty, has widely criticized the Nigerian government for the way it's fought the war against Boko Haram and has detailed in its reports crimes against humanity, war crimes in the way they've prosecuted it, and what they say are innocent bystanders being caught up in it. So, the U.S., was aware of what they were dealing with, and they understood, what was at stake. And I think they too quickly moved on. We're
dealing with a situation where we are 24 years away in the United States of America becoming a nation majority people of color. We are looking at the reality of 7 of the 10 fastest growing world economies are African nations.
That's right.
And so you've had for decades, you've had this whole back and forth in terms of how we need to deal with coverage and what we focus on. What are you hearing and seeing from Africans in terms of what we should be doing? And what are you hearing from Americans, African Americans, saying what Africans should be doing?
I think for Africans have a real disappointment, a continuing disappointment. A lot of Africans I speak to, with the way they're covered still in the West, they still feel that when Africa is covered, and and I think it's fair all too often across the media networks, media organizations in Africa, so in the US, in the West, it is still the stereotypes. It's still, again,
poor, destitute, famine,
white
corruption,
savior stories,
right?
White people coming in to save us, the ingenuity, the desire for betterment, the entrepreneurs, the women who are change makers, the inventions. It gets so much less coverage to all of that kind of theater of suffering. It is so more pronounced. And I think that's even if it gets covered now, because I will also say this, Africans make the point that Africa barely gets covered on networks like CNN now because it's all Trump. And it's not just CNN. As you know, it is all Trump everywhere. And that's one of my other criticisms about where we are, in this country. We kind of know what the Trump story is by now, right? You're either with him or you're not with him, Can he say
I ain't with his ass, but go ahead.
Well, I'm just saying.
Y'all know where we stand. Ain't with him at all.
No, I mean, anyway, let's not go down that rabbit hole. The point being, this incessant coverage of him to the exclusion of everything else, I think Africans feel in particular, especially because a lot of the nascent media houses on the continent themselves are weak, aren't as strong, don't have the resources to give the kind of coverage they'd like to see.
But you do have, though, because of the internet, because of digital, you don't have the same gatekeepers.
You don't.
Because look, this show
sure.
here. Matter of fact, coming in, I'm looking at, it was a tweet from a sister who's in the UK. I was in the Bahamas, and folks were quoting stories that we did.
Digital is changing the landscape.
And there are people who are in African nations who also watch.
Yeah.
And so, and granted, first of all, again, I make this point all the time that when we talk about Africa, we're talking about a continent. We're not talking about a country.
No, please don't.
And so,
that's not lose my mind.
No, but it always happens. So, what African countries do you think
have the strongest
are doing a good job with storytelling and using digital to be able to project what is happening to other parts of the world, so you can be aware? And where would you suggest folks who are watching go to look at coverage to know what's happening in those countries?
Well, I think that when you look at countries like Ghana, which are doing tremendous things, if you look at Ghana, if you look at even Kenya, if you look at South Africa, if you look at Rwanda, those markets are growing and they're increasingly robust, and their media houses are growing. But they are still problematic. And Nigeria, which has a plethora of papers and organizations, they are beset by some local problems, but there is more money being pumped into them,
right,
and they are shining a light on their own stories that they feel need to be told and shipping them out, because they also have a large diaspora out there beyond those borders of the countries. So they are doing something. And then on the other side, folks like Quartz Africa are doing a really good job.
Say it again.
Quartz have their own Africa platform. They're doing it. And I think it's growing. And again, there are no boundaries now, because people can watch you, people can tune in and see all sorts of podcasts. But I think that there is still, I will say this, for all of the digital disruption, there's still a lot of people who still kind of see BBC, CNN, Al Jazeera as kind of blue chip.
Colonialism. No, but the other
so they still look to them first.
Right. Well, but look, that's no different here. And so,
exactly.
And I think I think first of all, one of the things that I try to walk people through here, when people talk about why hasn't this changed, what's going on with African Americans, I say, well, first of all, you look at 400 years being in this country, and then if you talk about 243 years of slavery, then 92 years of Jim Crow, and grant you had the first black newspaper in March of 1827, then of course you had the Chicago Defender in 1905, and so many others. I said the reality is you're only talking, and I use 1970 as the marker, which is a year and a half after King gets assassinated. You're only talking about 49 years. I think what a lot of people also don't understand, people who have not bothered to actually read history, is that when you talk about African countries, African nations began to get their independence and freedom the same time during the Black Freedom Movement.
Yeah, that's
so
very true.
you're only talking about 50, 55 or so years, and the reality that many of those countries were coming out of white rule, blacks not having resources, not having political power, not having experience, and then now you're coming in, and now you have different countries where you have dictators. You have very few places that has had the stability.
Not to mention that some of these countries didn't exist before communism came in and chopped up the map.
And then when white folks left, they took everything. It was kind of like, okay, y'all want it, there you go. And so now you're like, oh crap. So then you talk, and which is also why, like for instance, when Obama was president and Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, and she was critical of Chinese investment, I was going, I'm sorry, unless you're coming with an American check, shut the hell up, because so it's a conundrum.
I'm critical of Chinese investment.
No. Here was my whole point.
Okay.
My problem was criticizing Chinese investment of African nations and not bringing a check. Don't do jack for the African countries.
Totally.
And so it's like, so it's a conundrum for African nations because they're sitting here saying, okay, I need infrastructure, I need investment. Who is talking to me? Well, if the United States, if France,
if the
if
World
Britain,
Bank and others,
if all these folks are ignoring me, it's like you're leaving me with one person, and China's sitting here going, we would love to talk to you, but it's a whole bunch of strings attached to it. You know, I mean, literally, I just came from the Bahamas, and that's a big resort there. When I was there 5 years ago, it was being built. And so we were driving around, and I'm seeing all these signs in Chinese. I'm like, yo. I said, we're in the Bahamas. I said, so explain to me. They said, oh, well, what happened was the guy who was building this resort, the money came from a Chinese bank. The Chinese said, oh, if we're going to put the money up, you got to use Chinese workers. They wanted to bring in 3,000 Chinese workers. The Bahamian government says, no, y'all can't do that. So they capped them at around 1,500. But they said, oh, you can't bring all 1,500 in at one time. So it was like groups of 300 and 400 and 500 they had to bring in. But also part of the problem is that there were no Bahamian, how many Bahamian companies that could actually build the kind of resort? And so you take that, so now when you go to the motherland, it's sort of the same thing. And so it's this whole...
lots of Chinese signs in countries on the continent and you find yourself thinking, same thing, there's that whole kind of, where am I? Like, there's a complete shock. Plus, the other thing is they come in, they flood the market with their workers that they bring in. They treat the locals. I'm from Sierra Leone, as I mentioned. We have a ton of Chinese people in there that have come in and are, I mean, like you said, the strings that are attached. The abusive practices, the environmental degradation that comes with some of the things that they're doing, will make your blood boil.
But the problem for the African nations is, I need investment. And I'm left with no choice but to take a bad deal in place of no deal.
Absolutely. I mean, and that is the reality that, you know, a lot of governments are facing. Our government in Sierra Leone is no different in terms of the conversations they're having with the Chinese, and they're everywhere, you know.
Do you believe Africans want to do business and have better relationships with African Americans?
That's a really interesting question that I've been, you know, the relationship between Africans and African Americans is one that I think about.
And again, for people to and I need people who are watching to understand, it's hard to even ask that question because, again, Africa is a continent. There are countries where you have long-standing relationships. So
like Ghana and African Americans have a deep bond, right? So you go to Ghana, I was in Ghana in December, and you see a lot of African Americans who've moved to Ghana.
Because Ghana has, out of all the African nations, really focused on tourism, focused on relationship, extending visas.
The year of return. You know,
and it was Ghana that created that phrase, the year of return.
You know, 200 years since the start of the North Atlantic slave trade, saying you don't have to know where you're from. Just come back. You can make this home. And so there has been a systematic, intentional outreach. So a country like Ghana is proof that, yes, there are some African countries, but I don't think there's another country like Ghana that has kind of led the way.
I think the closest might be South Africa, and that's because That's because one of the anti-apartheid movement that was
yes,
here.
Exactly. That helped with ending it and divestment and all that. But I guess my question to you is, how important is it to African Americans to have a good relationship with Africans? I mean, because it cuts both ways.
Right. No, but I asked the question because I think I use the phrase, when you don't know, you don't know. And the reality is slavery severed those ties. If you are an African American and you have the ability to actually trace your history, you're going to hit a stop. If you're going to hit a stop. Now, unless, like for instance,
Do you know where you're
my maternal...
You're from Sierra Leone,
My maternal...
You look like a Sierra
My
Leonean.
maternal paternal ancestors migrated from Haiti. So we did some research, and there was a manifest, a shipping manifest, where we discovered the name of one of the Le Mans who traveled to Louisiana. Okay, but if you're African American and you don't have anything along those lines, there's a stopping line there because it was severed. And I think what you have here is, in many ways, for African Americans, there's an identity with state. So when I ask the question, where are your people from? If you're in Chicago, somebody says, I'm from Chicago, you're like, where are your people from? They're going to say Mississippi or Arkansas, okay? And the reason I keep trying to explain to people why it's different for Latinos/Hispanics, and being from Texas, I use that purposely. You have identities with countries. So if you're from Peru, you're from Peru. You might be an American, regional, but you're from Peru. If you're from Colombia, if you're from again, if you're Jamaica, El Salvador, for either you have an identity. That's why it's very interesting when I had some people who were upset Major League Baseball when they have the home run derby, and some of these foreign players are waving their country's flag because for them they're representing their country. You know, they're playing ball in the United States. If you're African American, you're not necessarily waving the Alabama flag if you're from Alabama. You might say that's where I'm from, so you have no connection.
But okay,
so and I think so. Let me go. Reverend Leon Sullivan,
right?
Deceased, passed out of Philadelphia.
Yeah.
The one who introduced Operation Breadbasket to Dr. King. Reverend Sullivan, up until his death, held an annual conference.
That's right.
In different African nations to create that alliance. And I think what it requires is that 2.0, where you have individuals who are here, and I know individuals, to your point, who have moved from here to Ghana, to other African nations, to say the relationship was severed, but we do have a lot in common, and why should we not be doing business with one another? There's an HBCU initiative starting. I was there for the opening to reconnect HBCUs and African nations. Why? Because many African leaders studied at HBCUs. Right. Lincoln University, Nkrumah is a graduate of Lincoln University. And so you have that, and I think it has, to your point, the word you use, it has to be intentional. That's what it requires. And I think once knowledge comes in, and it's like, oh, wait a minute, hold up. There is kinship there.
But I think that's my question. Is there a kinship felt? I don't know. And I ask this to someone who's lived in this country for almost 40 years. The African Americans, is there a kinship felt? The kinship is felt. Africa.
The kinship is felt when you go from when you don't know to when you know.
I would think, call me naive, I would think in a time like this, where there's a president of this country saying things like, go back to where you're from, and has generally stirred a sense of people not belonging, that, listen, I'm from Africa, I grew up in Africa, and so it's easy for me to say, but I would think that there would be a longing. So tell me, you're having a conversation with African Americans. There would be a longing amongst the African American community to say, you know what? I need to find out. I need to go. I'll drop down in Ghana, even if I'm not from Ghana.
But here's what I mean when I use the phrase, when you don't know, you don't know. So, Gerald Horn, Chelsea, get that book off of my desk, please. That's what I do.
Chelsea.
Chelsea.
Sorry, Chelsea.
Gerald Horn wrote a book. And get the Gerald Horn book off of my desk, please. I want to show it. Gerald Horn wrote a book called Claude Burnett and the Associated Negro Press and the Jim Crow Paradox. Now, until reading the book, I'd never heard of Claude Burnett. I run 3 black newspapers.
Yeah, and I don't know.
So Claude Burnett actually took information, and he had different people who were writing stuff, and he took black newspapers' information and supplied it to African newspapers, and took information that was happening on the continent and supplied to black newspapers. And so for 50+ years, he would send this packet out of material, and even some mainstream papers were looking at all of this different material. And he had these dispatches from all these different countries, and so you had all these black newspapers where we couldn't get our news from anywhere else, reading about what was happening in these countries. I remember I was at it was a restaurant in Chicago when I ran Chicago Defender. They had these they basically decorated the men's bathroom with different newspapers and old papers. And I'm sitting there and I'm reading a story of this cricket match that was taking place in Jackson Park of some brothers who from other countries. And I'm like, yo, seriously? Here's the point I'm making. You had the available information that was being supplied. The problem is this is The Rise and Fall of the Associated Negro Press, Claude Burnett's Pan-African News and the Jim Crow Paradox by Gerald Horn. It's an amazing book. So I'm reading this and I'm going, wow, and he was talking about his business ties to African countries and the exchange of information, because again, you had these African nations that were achieving independence. At the same time, they were watching African Americans fighting for freedom. You had black entertainers like Harry Belafonte and others who were aligning, and so you sort of had that. What happened was with desegregation, with the end of segregation, you then saw your black newspapers fall away, which also meant information. The reason he says the Jim Crow paradox is because, so at every point they struck a blow against Jim Crow, it actually was a nail in the coffin of black media. And that's what I think the difference is. The difference is when black media was no longer able to financially tell the story, then you had no information. So if you're black, you didn't know what was happening about a certain sister in this country or in that country. And so I think we have to get back to the point where we are exchanging of information, informing people to go, whoa, those type of things are happening. I had no idea.
But to your point, at the time of digital now, can you even make that argument?
Yes, you can.
Because if I don't, anyone who's interested.
No, but where do I go? See, here's the deal.
Let's start with Dr. Google.
No, follow me here. It's a bunch of stuff on Google. That's why I asked you the question. You said Quartz News, right?
Yeah.
That's why I said, if somebody's watching who's interested, where do I go? The Africa Channel, Paula Madsen, her company.
Africa Report, there's
right.
all these people.
So I think, again, what we have to do is to say to somebody who doesn't know, okay, start here. Here are places where you can go, where you can trust to get information from. To me, this is about information. And once I have the information, once you start linking people together, once you start reminding HBCUs of your history, your lineage, where you have African leaders who graduated from HBCUs, like, hold up.
I think that's why I disagree with you.
We're not separate, we're connected.
I think that's why I disagree, because you're saying, or me, it's not so much disagreeing with you. I think there's the nuance that I'm hung up on, because you're saying it's about information that will kind of lead to a deepening of the bond. I guess my question is, I guess my inclination is to think it should be more primordial than that, in the sense that it should be more kind of like, it should come from the inside, more emotional.
No, but it can't. It can't. Here's why.
Well, every time you look in the mirror, in this country, you walk down the road.
No. It can't. Something can't come from the inside if it's never on the inside. See,
But you know, without knowing where you're from, that you're not originally from here.
Yes. But here's the piece. You can't ignore the power of white supremacy. The power of white supremacy taught us to actually hate you.
Yeah.
Colonialism taught you to hate us.
I don't think that's true.
Well, hold up. I've had this debate with different people.
Yeah, because I'm always having this debate.
And so what happens is, what we have to do, this is where I talk a lot on this show about a reprogramming. There has to be a reprogramming. I believe there has to be Africans do understand the power of colonialism. African Americans understand the power of white supremacy. And I think what we have to do is say, here in 2019, we have to reprogram our people to lose all that crap that was put into us in terms of not trusting, they're horrible. And then remember, we also were, just like white folks were fed the stereotypes, so were we, because we're here as well. And so we have to break those things down to get people to understand that, oh, wait a minute, hold up, I'm sorry. I'm sitting here buying somebody's view of huts and dusty roads and walking around butt naked and those things, as opposed to, no, this is what's happening here. But that only happens if I see it and I hear it, and there's information. So information, good information replaces bad information. And again, when I'm presented with that, now it's, whoa, hold up, I was taught this, but now I'm seeing this.
So is it that, okay, so let me ask you this
That's the
question.
process to me.
So let me ask you this question. So a friend said this to me once. She said when she was, an African-American friend said to me that when she was in school, and they talked about Africa, and she was in class, you know, they talked about huts and they talked about people living in trees, and she was embarrassed. She was embarrassed to have a connection to Africa. So back when she was growing up, if someone said you were African, those were fighting words.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Okay.
Because you were conditioned and trained, and remember, the greatest export in America is mass media. So mass media, not only did mass media present black people as buffoons and as just idiots, they presented Africans as savages, as folks who eat each other, as just this. So all of a sudden you're like, oh hell, I don't want any part of that. What changed that? When Alex Haley did Roots, mass media showed a different view. All of a sudden, you had this resurgence of African Americans who began to take African names.
So why hasn't the bond deepened?
Because, again, that was a moment in time. What you did not have, you have to have sustained growth. It has to be sustained. It can't be 3, 4, 5 years is hot. Then, to your point about this book, it's the exact same thing. What can't happen, media, all the attention for 4 weeks. Then, okay, we're done. We're going to go over here. What has to be sustained, and to your point about owning our story, to me, what has to be, we can't depend on CNN. We can't depend on the New York Times. We can't depend on mass media. We have to return to a point where African Americans are controlling our narrative, telling our story, and then linking with Africans to say, you're my brother's keeper, you're my brother's keeper. Let's provide the information to reprogram our people, break down those stereotypes, and then create a new state of mind to now see in Africa in a different way.
And I agree with all of that. All I would say is I don't want to underplay the part of agency, an individual agency, individual interest, individual desire.
But I can't, but I understand your point, but I can't.
That's all I'm saying.
But here's the piece, though. And here's where I would disagree with you, or where I will push back on that. The only way I'm going to know about this book if it was presented to me in a way that I understand. So if I'm depending, so how long have we not gone this conversation? Give me the time. So we've been talking 40 minutes. I can guarantee you there's somebody that's going to watch this interview and they're going to say, I remember that story.
Yeah. What happened there?
But okay,
it just fell off.
I didn't know all of that. And that's not necessarily, well, that one person who goes out and buys the book.
No, they'll buy the book. Okay,
right. Yeah, buy the book. But what I'm trying to say is that we have to understand that an individual thing still requires someone else to bring something to the fore. I can't go get something that I don't know exists. Like, I can't, if you told me, go find this, okay, what am I looking for? Just go find it. Okay. If I told my niece to go find something, she's like, Am I looking in the garage, the first floor, the second floor, the third floor, in the kitchen? Where am I going?
I take your point.
I got to narrow that thing down to say, girl, it's in the kitchen. Otherwise, hell, she in the doggone garage. I'm like, what you doing out here? Well, you told me just to go look for it. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
And so our media then is able to say, yo, here's a story. For me, the ability to be, that's why I'm asking the question, where should they go?
Yeah.
Where should somebody go? So it's like a starter kit.
Yeah.
If y'all want to learn about, so I would say Jeff Kaninga used to be at CNN.
Yeah, that's
if you're on Twitter, follow Jeff Kaninga. Okay, he's there in Kenya.
Yeah.
Media
in
outlet,
Nigeria.
you can follow him.
There's A24. There's there are a bunch of places.
That's my point. So what I'm saying is, if I don't even know where to look, I want to read, but I don't even know where to go. But if someone is saying, hey, here's where you start, and then now the interest is sparked. Now I'm into it. Now I'm reading into it. So for me, I went to Ghana in 2008. That was my only trip to the motherland. I'm likely going to be in South Africa in October. My readings of Malcolm X. People talk about Malcolm X when he went on his Mecca. Well, they didn't realize Malcolm X spent almost 5 months hitting multiple countries.
That's right.
When you read about Maya Angelou, when Shirley Hunter Galt moved to South Africa, her and her husband, after Mandela was freed, to open I think it was the NPR bureau there. And so what that particular book, reading the relationship with Claude Barnett, and then all these entertainers and the sending dispatches back, then now, for me now, it's like, yo, I don't only want to go to South Africa. I'm like, okay, what other countries can I go to? Again, what other media people can I align with? That, to me, begins to change because we open our mind to receive and have a broader view.
Now I wish I could hear from your viewers to hear what they make of this conversation.
You will when we run it.
What I'm trying to figure out where they sit, who sits with you and who sits with me.
Oh, trust me, more sit with me.
No, I doubt that.
I guarantee you that.
Please.
I guarantee you that.
Whatever.
You can bank on that.
Whatever.
I mean, you've always known more sit with me. That ain't nothing changed.
It's gonna be cold on that side of the room sitting with you.
Ain't gonna be that cold.
It's gonna be that cold.
Ice cold alpha, that's how it is. The book, Beneath the Tamarind Tree, a story of courage, family, the law school girls of Boko Haram. Aisha Sase, folks, take a look, zoom in. This is the book. Zoom in on the book. Zoom in on the book. There you go.
Thank you. Zoom.
Hey, this is my show, calm down.
Oh, whatever, you need some
Calm
help.
down.
Zoom.
Calm down, here we go.
Thank
So that's
you.
the book.
Thank
Be
you
sure,
for this
be sure to take a look at it. I tolerate her.
Yeah, please.
I tolerate her.
Please.
So,
Friend.
good seeing you, Scrub.
You can't keep going around calling me Scrub.
Bum.
It's been fun. It's been real, Scrub.
Scrub. Holla! All right, folks, I certainly hope you enjoyed that conversation with Aisha Sase. Please get her book. It's a phenomenal book, and I certainly believe that you will enjoy it and get it for a friend as well. Also, this is the kind of conversation that we have here, right here on Roland Martin Unfiltered, the only place to have this kind of conversation. So we want you to support us in what we do. Please join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar you give goes to support this show, making these type of conversations possible. So please go to Roland Martin Unfiltered and .com, RolandMartinUnfiltered.com, and please, you can use the Square, Cash App, or PayPal to join our Bring the Funk fan club. All right, folks, I shall see you guys tomorrow. Be sure to have a great day. Hey, fam, I want you to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Roland S. Martin. And don't forget to turn want to check out Roland Martin Unfiltered? YouTube.com/Roland S. Martin. And subscribe to our YouTube channel. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. It's Roland Martin Unfiltered. See that name right there? Roland Martin Unfiltered. Like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's YouTube.com/Roland S. Martin. And don't forget to turn on your notifications so when we go live, you'll know it. You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. It's Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered daily digital show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Our goal is to get 20,000 of our fans contributing $50 each for the whole year. You can make this possible. RolandMartinUnfiltered.com.
Hey everybody, this is Sherry Shepherd. You're watching Roland Martin Unfiltered, and while he's doing Unfiltered, I'm practicing the wobble. Yes, I am. Because Roland Martin's the one, he will do it backwards, he will do it on the side. He messes everybody up when he gets into the wobble, because he doesn't know how to do it, so he does it backwards. And it messes me up every single time. So, I'm working on it. I got it. You got Roland Martin.
Hi, my name is LaToya Luckett, and you're watching Roland Martin Unfiltered.
What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Mac Wiles, and you are watching Roland Martin Unfiltered.
What's up, y'all? It's Ryan Destiny, and you're watching Roland Martin Unfiltered.
What up, Lana Well, and you are watching Roland Martin Unfiltered.
Hey fam, want to check out Roland Martin Unfiltered? The blackest show on all of digital, cable, and broadcast. Check out our audio podcast. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. It's Roland Martin Unfiltered. Press play.